So I'm gonna look absolutely disheveled with this because I just came out of watching A Quiet Place Day 1, which I think was a pretty decent movie. A Quiet Place Day 1 follows the events of the first day of the alien invasion through Lupita Nyong'o's character in New York City as she tries to traverse this landscape with her cat, funnily enough. But later on, she comes across Joseph Quinn's Eric as they both survive the aftermath of this invasion, which puts them in very dangerous predicaments. Rank wise, I'd say that this film is actually in between the first film and the second film. The first film I absolutely enjoyed. The second film was pretty good, but to be honest, I think this film is somewhat higher than the second film. It still maintains sort of that horror thriller vibes that I got with the first film, and it also keeps the rules consistent, which is great. Which some of those rules is like rain blocks out any loud noise, and of course any noise is bad. And speaking on the monsters themselves, they're just like completely terrifying, especially with the one scene in the middle of the film when everyone's just walking to the boats, and I'm sure that you've seen that in the trailer with all of the clickers, I'm just gonna call them that, when they attack all the people. It's just completely terrifying when you actually see it in theaters, because it's just a complete massacre, and the cinematography work in that specific scene was just really good. And speaking of some of those shots, the jump scares in this film were actually completely terrifying. When I was in the theater, like I knew there were some jump scares going into this with like the whole horror part of A Quiet Place, but actually feeling that tension and just feeling when the monsters, when the clickers are just going to just pop out was just completely terrifying. And I also watched this in IMAX, so just seeing and feeling that terror is just completely kind of terrifying. There's this one shot in the film when Samira is hallucinating the past, when she's in her apartment, she's looking out the window, and you can see like New York City normal being all lively, and then out of nowhere there's this jump scare that completely got me. It just got me in a way that I don't think any other jump scare in the film. And then there's this other scene in the film where Samira and Eric are trying to get through this flooded subway tunnel, and just seeing the clicker come down from the ceiling and just completely rush at them when Eric made that slight noise. It was just completely terrifying, especially thanks to the cinematography of that scene where it just pushes right on them. And it was just, seeing that was just completely terrifying, because it increases so much tension and so much intensity with the horror aspect of it all. And the jump scares overall, they were pretty good, and they were pretty terrifying in certain cases. However, I also think that it was slightly overplayed near the climax and conclusion of the film, where Eric was trying to escape from all of the clickers after making a noise on like that little port. And I think it was just overplayed, because you have all of these monsters coming out in broad daylight, and the cinematography just carries that sequence perfectly. But in that specific instance, I don't know, it just really felt like it was being overplayed a little bit. It was definitely being thrown into more of that action side of thing, and it's just, I don't know, it's just slightly overplayed. But the jump scares were definitely awesome. But also, I just gotta like talk about the cat, who's legitimately the MVP of this entire film. Like, whoever's the cat actor in this film, it did such a good job, and I gotta look it up after this, but it did such a good job playing into the comedic moments of the entire film. Like, everyone was laughing, I was laughing, which was pretty funny. But it was also surprisingly one of the main important plot devices that carried this film, and also built that dynamic between Samira and Eric throughout this film. There are definitely some funny moments with a cat, like once Samira and Eric finally arrive at the pizzeria, you can see like the cat trying to take some of the pizza, and then near the beginning of the film, where the cat also comes across Eric for the first time, it just, I don't know, it just has some sort of charm, especially with the close-up cinematography. The cinematography is just on point, but seeing the cat act in such a way in the film, in those specific sequences, it was just so funny, and it honestly carried most of the humor in this film. And to be honest, props to that cat. However, I also felt like it was hammered in that it was being too funny. It was trying to be too funny at certain points, especially near the latter half of the film, where Eric is in this construction site trying to save Frodo from like all of the clickers, but then Eric almost gets caught by one of the clickers, but eventually the clicker goes away and he's able to save Frodo. But it just felt like they needed to put in a more intense moment just to try and regain that intensity from the previous scenes, which were a little bit more lighthearted, just to push that in a little bit more. The first act honestly felt more like a slow burn between Lupita's character and Alex's character, because it tried to establish that friendly dynamic, but it decided to make it short-lived by having that jump scare in the first act of the film, I want to say. And having that jump scare, which was completely terrifying, sort of undercuts what dynamic they could have had, because it essentially felt basic, because you get this short amount of time with Alex's character and Lupita's character trying to make this chemistry with each other, trying to make this dynamic, and you sort of get that feeling that you want to see them live with and eventually survive. But it gets to that one part, and I just really wish that Alex's character completely lived. But hey, at least we got a good jump scare out of it. On Samira herself, her motivations in the film honestly were completely comical, because you wouldn't expect that all she wants is to get pizza from this one place so desperately, because it's the only pizza that will remain in New York City when everything goes to hell. But honestly, over time, it starts to build why she wants to get this pizza, which is actually really sad and connects to that family aspect of it all that's been seen in both part 1 and part 2 of this entire franchise. And the reason for that is because Samira, she wants to, well, essentially Samira used to get pizza with her dad when she was younger, and eventually when he passed away, it was just completely heartbreaking for her, and she couldn't let it go, which honestly adds to that emotional aspect in so many ways. And it's completely just so heartbreaking when you realize what journey she has to go through and what pain she has to essentially face. And honestly, it just was a pretty good motivation for her character. Eric is an interesting character to pair with Samira, because we don't get him in the beginning of the film, but rather we get him after the invasion actually happens. And once we get Eric and Samira together, it's just so touching, because honestly, we get those little interactions that build upon their chemistry, especially when they get to the pizzeria in the latter half of the film. Those moments in the film was so heartwarming, so touching, and just so adorable, just to see them have this little nice moment when all of this calamity, all this chaos is happening outside their door. But just seeing them get along, putting on this nice little performance, especially with their facial performances throughout the entire film, it just was so good. So props to the both of them. Props to Lupita Nyong'o and Joseph Quinn for bringing some really good facial performances in the film. But it also did feel like Eric was a little bit bare bones, because we don't really get any real motivations besides that he wants to help Samira essentially survive and get away from this entire mess, and serve as this aid to Samira. But I'm just so glad that they have this chemistry built with each other, and honestly, it's just so sweet to see two characters who aren't related to each other in this franchise have this nice little chemistry throughout the entire film. All in all, I was gonna give A Quiet Place Day 1 a 3.5 out of 5, but considering all that I've said, I think it deserves a 4 out of 5. I'd place A Quiet Place, the first film, somewhere a little bit on the 4 to 5 scale, while part 2 is somewhere in between a 4 and a 3. So I'd say that A Quiet Place Day 1 definitely fits in with the 4 out of 5s of my entire watch list that I've watched this year. So honestly, Quiet Place Day 1, pretty good film. Definitely would recommend.